Hello class, welcome to lesson 3.2, which is all about solving linear equations by graphing. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to solve linear equations by graphing and estimate solutions to a linear equation by graphing. So let's jump into some vocabulary. Just a reminder, a linear function is a function where the graph is a line. A root is any value that makes the equation true. A root is kind of another word for solution. Zeros are the values of x for which f of x equals 0. So whenever you plug a number in for x and you get a 0 out, then you end up with a 0 for the function. Okay? So let's start by solving each equation. This is another way to find the roots of the equation. In this example, we want to solve this one, okay? So if we have 0 equals 2/5 x plus 6, in order to solve, we want to get x by itself. So that means I'm going to subtract 6 from both sides. I have a negative 6 equals 2/5 x. And in order to get x by itself, I'm multiplying by the fraction 2/5. So instead of multiplying, I'm going to divide by 2/5. Divide by 2/5. And I have x equals negative 6 divided by 2/5. Except I don't like having fractions within fractions. So remember, dividing by a fraction is the same as multiplying by the reciprocal or the inverse. Okay? So let's quickly solve that. We have a negative 6 times 5 on the top. That's a negative 30 divided by 1 times 2 is 2. So that is negative 15. So we have negative 15 equals x. That is our solution for this first one. X equals negative 15. Okay, let's look at part B. We have negative 1.25 x plus 3 equals 0. So if I look at this one, I want to get x by itself. So what I could do, I could subtract 3 from both sides. But I see my x is already negative, so instead of subtracting 3, I'm going to choose to add 1.25x to both sides. So now my x is a positive, and so is my 3. If you had subtracted 3 from both sides, ultimately you would end up with the same answer. But this way, I don't have to deal with negatives. So I have 3 equals 1.25x. In order to get the 1.25 to the other side, I need to undo some multiplication by using my division. So if I do 3 divided by 125, I end up with 2.4 equals x. So I know x equals 2.4. So those would be my answers for those two examples there. Now why don't you go ahead and try to solve this one on your own, see how you do. Hopefully you ended up with x equals 9. If not, be sure to ask either myself or a friend for some help. And let's look at our next example. We have example 2, where we want to solve each equation. Let's start with letter A. We have 4x plus 3 equals 4x minus 5. Okay, so I have an x on both sides, so that means I want to get my x's to one side. So I'm going to take my 4x from the right-hand side of the equation. I'm going to subtract it over to the other side. 4x minus 4x, that's a 0, so I'm left with a negative 5 on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, I have a 4x minus 4x, so I'm left with a 3. And now I have 3 equals negative 5. Is that true? No, so this is a no solution. Okay, let's try the next one. We have 2 minus 3x equals 6 minus 3x. Okay, again, I have x's on both sides of the equal sign, so I want to move them. So I'm going to add 3x to the right-hand side and move that over to the left-hand side. So now on the left-hand side I have 2 minus 3x plus 3x. That leaves me with 2. And on the right-hand side I have 6 minus 3x plus 3x equals 6. So I have a 2 equals 6. Again, that's not true. So that means this is also a no solution. If you want a shortcut, because I know we always like shortcuts, one shortcut that if you can identify this, it's going to save you some time. Notice that in part A, we have a positive 4x on the left-hand side. We have a positive 4x on the right-hand side. Whenever that happens, and you have different numbers here and here, you are going to end up with no solution. Here we have a negative 3x and a negative 3x, and then we have two different numbers here. That is also a no solution. You need to be careful though, because if that 2 and 6, so if instead, new example, if I do 3x minus 5 equals 3x minus 5, and I subtract 3x from both sides, I'm left with negative 5 equals a negative 5. That is a solution, okay? So you need to make sure that these two numbers that aren't the variables are different in order to get your no solution. But when in doubt, you can always solve it like this. Alright, go ahead and try this next one on your own, see how you do. Hopefully you ended up with no solution. But if you have any questions about that, be sure to ask for some help, and I would be happy to help you. Smartboard's still being glitchy. Alright, our last example for the day. Miss Johnson's class is selling candy to raise money for a class trip. They paid $45 for the candy, and they are selling each candy bar from $1.50. The function y equals 1.50x minus 45 represents their profit y when they sell x candy bars. Find the zero and describe what it means for the context of the situation. So I rewrote the equation, and we want to find the zero. That means we need to plug 0 in for y and find out what x value makes that true. So if we continue to solve, I can add 45 to both sides. I have 45 equals 150x. If I divide both sides by 150, I now have x equals 30. Okay, but what does that mean? Because finding the zero is only part of it. We want to describe what it means in the context of this solution. So if x equals 30, and x is the number of candy bars we sell, that means I need to sell 30 candy, or our class needs to sell 30 candy bars in order to break even with how much money we originally paid for the candy. Okay? So that is what that means. We need to sell $30 or 30 candy bars in order to start making a profit. All right, go ahead and try to figure this next one out on your own and see how you do. Hopefully you ended up with 3 1/3, and that it means Raphael will arrive at his friend's house in 3 hours and 20 minutes. If you have any questions about today's lesson, be sure to ask either myself or a friend, and I'd be more than happy to help. Have a good night.